Okay, so I am Barbara Garrity Blake, and I am sitting here with Pam Davis Morris at the Core Sound Museum on Harkers Island on June 7th, 2016, and this is part of the Fisheries Reform Act Oral History Project. So Pam, can you just start out by giving us a little background about, when and where you were born, where you grew up, and how you came into this world of fisheries?
I was born in Newport News, Virginia in 1962. My daddy was an engineer, and his first job was working at the shipyard in Newport News. My mother is a medical technician, but she wasn't working at the time because she was home with me. And my brother was also born in Virginia. And when we were 5, we moved to Beaufort while we were building a house in Smyrna, which all of us are Davises, really from Davis Shore. So after I grew up, I moved to Davis. I lived with for 7 years, then married for another 20, a commercial fisherman. But even when I was in high school, I was commercial fishing, clamming, working at the fish house, heading shrimp. That was my first job when I was 15. And went to college, graduated from UNC Charlotte with an art degree, an art education degree. I became a commercial fisherman when I graduated from college and was a shrimp fisherman and a gillnet fisherman and a clammer from occasionally. Work when I was going through college in the summers, I would clam also. And in 1988, I had a son, Cody, and after that, I did not fish as much, obviously. But when he got older, we still took him shrimping and all that. Had a daughter in 1993, and that pretty much ended my fishing career because I had too many other things to do with children. But a few years after that, well, actually before that, in the 80s, I started attending fisheries meetings, basically about clams. And kicking clams was the first fisheries meeting I ever went to, whereas there was a knockdown, drag out fight in the middle of the aisle in Pivers Island, which was interesting. And I have been attending fisheries meetings ever since. When the Fisheries Reform Act started, well, no, actually before that, when the moratorium was put on commercial fishing license, that, stirred up a lot of what we are dealing with today. And adjunct to that, I'm a member of the Carteret County Fishermen's Association who is interested in policy. I don't know how far I'm supposed to go into this.
Well, let's just submit because you are just all fisheries. This is great. But backing up, when you were, one of your first jobs you said was heading shrimp, what fish house was that?
I had a shrimp at Grady George Davis's Fish House in Davis and also at James Starnes Fish Company in Davis.
Okay.
Both.
Yeah.
Depends on who had a shrimp of the day.
And neither of those two places are open, are they?
No. James Starnes just closed, but Grady George's has been closed for a long time because it was actually his daddy's, but it wasn't really. Grady George became one of these people that that actually takes seafood off the boat, but then he would take it to another fish house like James Starnes mainly, because he didn't have an ice room. As I grew up anyway, it wasn't really kept up, and so he became like a peddler of sorts. Like he didn't go up and down the beach or anything like that. But long story short, there is one of the 2 vehicle ferries with access on Core Banks. The Cape Lookout ferry is at the location of Grady George's Fish House.
Okay.
Now, that's where it was.
And then the other thing, just for the listeners' benefit who might not be familiar with different types of fisheries, can you explain what clam kicking is?
Clam kicking is the mechanical harvest of clams, which means that instead of using a clam rake or your hands or your feet to catch clams, Generally, this doesn't occur in shallow water. It's usually deep water where clams are inaccessible by hand capture means. But you put a kicker plate on your boat where the rudder is. It's a rudder, but it's got a specially designed plate that sits at an angle that is perpendicular to the rudder, and it forces the wash from the propeller down and kicks out the clams out of the bottom, which there's a cage. We had a bigger operation, relatively speaking, but usually there's a cage of some sort. It could be metal or it could be a net, but usually nets won't work unless it's just a little tiny boat. On our boat, we had a big cage, and it kicked the clams into a cage. The bars were set at less than an inch, or an inch, actually. They were set at an inch to let out button clams, and those are the immature, or not the immature, they're mature clams, they're just small. So, that's how you do it. Mm-hmm. And then you cull up on the culling tray.
And then you piqued my curiosity when you said one of the first meetings was about clam kicking, and there was a knockdown fight in the aisle. What was that about?
Well, that was between the Salter Pathers and I think they're from Broad Creek. Anyway, they were co-users of Bogue Sound, and there were certain areas that were open, and I think maybe still are in Bogue Sound clam kicking. At certain times of the year in the winter, and it was between the hand clammers and the mechanical harvest clammers, and they were going to knots over the fishing grounds. And back then, there weren't any such, animals really that made any difference to anybody about this, the emergence of the sport fishing bunch and whatever. They weren't even thought about. We never even considered them. They were sort of people who were there, but we didn't really, know what they were doing or anything. This was between us.
So the good old days where the conflicts were between fishermen.
Yes.
Commercial
fishermen.
Yeah.
User groups was what it was.
Yeah, and before this
Not so much now, but back then it was.
So, Pam, when do you think the bad blood started between recreational and commercial fishermen or fishing groups? When did that happen?
Well, there really wasn't any bad blood that I knew anything about, or nobody around here knew anything about until the moratorium process happened. There was an attorney, Bob Lucas, who sort of spearheaded that. You knew Bob, and anyway, so they decided, they being these, I guess recreational fishing groups, whatever. That something needed to be done. At the same time, there were these rumblings in Florida about a net ban, and that was a movement that was started in Texas by the Coastal Conservation Association over red drum, who's fishing that practice of capturing red drum that they were opposed to did not occur on the East Coast anyway, which was a Menhaden, basically, operation, a purse-seine operation that was targeting drum. That never occurred here. We never had a problem with it. Didn't really realize or understand that other people were projecting this problem on us and expanding, this idea that something needed to be done. I didn't think any of the commercial people were really aware of it that much at all. I know I wasn't, and it was always whatever conflict there were, it was between commercial fishermen. It was never involving a recreational fisherman. Those were the people we saw coming to the fish house for bait or wanting a clue or two on where to catch, whatever fish they were looking for at the time. So I never really heard anything about this until the moratorium process began. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I was alone in that.
Yeah. So, of course, the moratorium was what really kicked off the whole Fisheries Reform Act process. Can you tell us how you were involved, if at all, in that process? Where were you? What was your involvement? What was going on at the time?
Well, before the moratorium process, there was another process that had to do with oysters, called the Blue Ribbon Oyster. It wasn't a committee. There was a name for it. Whatever
Council or committee.
yeah,
or
something to that effect.
Yeah.
Anyway, what they were all about was, trying to look at oysters and the supposed decline of oysters. Oysters at the time were facing this dermo and MSX outbreaks in the 1980s that were really having a big impact on oyster populations. So they formed this blue ribbon oyster thing. Well, some of the people pushing this blue ribbon oyster thing were what we and some of us, and we, I say, just individuals viewed as folks trying to take over Core Sound and take it for their benefit and possess it as if it were their own. And also at this about same time, there was a clam lease gained through a loophole that happened by a fellow in Atlantic who still has that lease on the eastern side of Core Banks, or Core Sound next to Core Banks. And that was a total firestorm about that. That was before the moratorium steering committee was commenced, was this blue ribbon thing. So people were talking about locally here. I don't know how far out it went because Carteret County is like Shellfish Central, or was at the time. Now I think that's more down south now to an extent than it is here. South of the 58 Bridge, they're more concerned about shellfish than we are. Although there's a huge number of people who recreationally clam here all over the place. That's just what people like to do in their free time, go home and have clam bake. So anyway,
were you involved in that blue ribbon oyster?
I went to some of the meetings, yes. I was not on a committee for that. I mean, I was just around it. Like I say, the first meeting I went to was about clam kicking, where we thought that they were going to change the area around Cedar Island that you could kick clams, and that's where all the clams were, mainly. There was still some, like, in the channels of Core Sound, there were chowder clams, mainly, so you knew you weren't going to make a lot of money off of them. Money clams were off of Cedar Island and Portsmouth and up there in the deep water around Harbor Island, Wainwright's, so anyway, but I was not a part of any of those committees. However, I did attend the meetings and other commercial fishermen. Commercial fishermen have always attended meetings, especially if they thought it was going to put them out of business or get them off of the fishing grounds, is what that amounts to. That's putting you out of business when I say it. So I was not on the moratorium steering committee. I was an outsider. I did not really know much about it other than relying on others at the fish house to say what's going on. Or I met these women, especially with the blue ribbon thing, whom you know, that was Mildred Gilgo and Lenny Saunders and Elaine Davis.
I'm trying to remember, there was the whole women's auxiliary movement.
There was, but,
And they were involved in that, but they were also working on their own battle.
Those three especially, I know there was another one, I can't remember who it was, but those three especially were concerned about this blue ribbon oyster thing and the Core Sound, what became the Core Sound moratorium. So they were the ones that I was not involved with them. I was in meetings where they were, because at the before any advisory committee had commenced, there was a shellfish advisory committee. And they were just some little committee out there, mainly oyster growers who didn't want anybody else to come to their committee meeting. That's what it amounted to. But these three women went to this meeting, and me and my mother went in the 80s. I just wanted to stop and see what was going on because, I'm curious that way. So I saw them being ignored or talked bad to in this shellfish meeting. They just, these men, and it was men on this committee, just tried to ignore these three women. Well, I know them three women, and you ain't going to ignore them. You ain't going to do it. And so...
Is this the Marine Fisheries Commission committee?
It was.
Okay.
Or else it was a division of marine fishery. I think the division actually started it, and they were just basically shellfish growers trying to push their shellfish growing agenda. But there weren't any wild fishermen on this committee that I recall. But these three women, and they had to do with this blue ribbon thing, and these three women found out about it. I found out about it, and I went, and that was my observation of one. That was maybe in the second thing I ever went to, and I was like, wow, they're not going to take no crap from this bunch of men, and they're not going to be ignored either. And I admired that. I mean, I admire strong people anyway who stand up for what's right, and what they were doing, in my view, wasn't right. And because, there's the whole philosophy of, submerged lands are public lands. They are not private lands unless you've dug out something and created a marina or something of that variety. I can see where that might be in private hands. But any natural area underwater from the high tide mark down, those are public lands as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think private individuals have a right to public lands, but under certain circumstances. And, so I was just interested to see that those women were standing up for what they believed in. And I agree with 100%. Because being from eastern Carteret County, you had to fight for whatever you got.
So seeing those women that day, do you think that inspired you to get more involved in fish politics?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. Those three were my inspiration. They still are today, are my inspiration. I mean, Mildred, I can't tell you how much I admire Mildred Gilgo, because they were smart. They did their research. They could not be fooled, because, this gang out running around out here thought they were so smart. They would just talk their way around them women. Well, honey, they didn't know a candle compared to what them women had done. They had researched everything to the nth degree, and they got what they wanted. They are the ones. They went door to door with petitions explaining to people what was going on out there in Court Sound after that lease was gained across the Sound, and they had a moratorium put on leasing, period, at all, on Core Sound, which is still there. And they put together, all these committees through the years. Dr. Orbach was one of them, this user group study, which was the biggest waste of money of anything I've ever seen in my entire life. Paid $300,000 for nothing. I went to the follow-up meetings for that, the Christie Wright Lodge, and I'm like, this is the biggest waste of money I have ever seen, ever. So, long story short, the moratorium's still on. It has not been changed. They're still trying to get it lifted. I just had a meeting with Carteret County Fishermen's Association where a guy from the division or from Shellfish, whatever, came and brought bearing maps, wanting to know where that they did not want any clam leasing. And so, they're still trying to lift the moratorium today. Now, whether they will remains to be seen.
Yeah, and so just for the listener, right now we're talking about a moratorium that prohibited any expansion of clam leased bottom or shellfish leases.
Shellfish leases.
On Core Sound. And earlier we were talking about a different moratorium, which was for in advance of the Fisheries Reform Act.
Right.
So there's
moratorium on commercial fishing licenses.
Right. Okay. So Pam, can you just tell us how you got involved in that process, or did you go to the meetings? Did you testify? Were you on an advisory committee, or what were you doing during the moratorium?
Well, I'll tell you what I was doing. I was my real involvement with the moratorium came just like most everybody else. The moratorium was just another something like the blue ribbon thing and various and sundry other projects that had happened that really didn't amount to anything. So folks are kind of like, yeah, they're meeting, so what? Do I really care about this? Are they really going to do anything? I wasn't going to get too involved with it because I had a lot of other things going on until they decided what was going to become of all this. So the moratorium met at least 2 years minimum, and they produced this final report. Well, some of the people who were involved, whom I'm not going to name, with the Core Sound moratorium also kept their eye out for other things, including this final report by the Moratorium Steering Committee. Well, one of them sent it to me, and anyway, it weren't good, I'll put it to you that way. And I was like, who are these people serving on this daggone friggin' committee? Who are these people? Do they represent me? I don't friggin' think so. They've fell and bumped their head if they think all this is going to happen. So, a great sense of unease settled in when that report was released. Well, we had a man in the legislature at the time from Carteret County, Jonathan Robinson. And Jonathan was a legislator.
And what did Jonathan do for a living?
Jonathan was a commercial fisherman and a long-haul fisherman. Anyway, Jonathan was serving as a representative, representing our area. So we had a man on the inside. So when and also at the time, right up until the current governor took office, there was a committee called the Joint Legislative Committee on Seafood and Aquaculture. And everything seafood had to go through that committee for vetting before it went any further. So this final report, was going to seafood and aquaculture. Well, Barbara has, you mentioned a little bit ago about the ladies' auxiliary. There was a ladies' auxiliary, which these folks from Atlantic, I think Barbara was on it, Janice Smith, they used to meet at her house. I had heard about a meeting that they were having. I did not go, and there are reasons for that. But that was and Sandy Gaskell, my good friend here on the island, was a part of the old auxiliary. So there were also other women's auxiliaries. There was a strong auxiliary in Pamlico County. I don't know where else in the state, but mainly there was the Carteret County Auxiliary and the Pamlico County Auxiliary made up of these women. And these women didn't take things lightly or lying down. Also, Twyla Nelson was on that too. And Twyla was hooked up politically with Beverly Perdue. So there was somebody else. Beverly was our senator at the time when all this was happening. I know. So, anyway, so when the auxiliary was meeting, and I didn't really know, I was invited to go, but my problem with auxiliary was they were a part of the North Carolina Fisheries Association, and I felt like, from what I understood, that they were doing fundraising activities and grunt work of sorts for the association, but they did not have a vote on the association board. And I was like, I'm not going to be a party to that. And I didn't think it should be made up of all women either. I think it should be men and women, everybody. And I don't really necessarily think it should be only commercial fishermen. I think it should be other people. Anybody concerned about this should be able to go to these meetings and have a say in it. And that was just my personal belief. But they were out there doing stuff. So when that report was released, the auxiliary got a meeting up in Davis Shore. I went to that meeting at the fire department, and we always met at Davis because it was central, down east. So we get to the fire department, and Jonathan was leading that meeting. Jerry Shield of the North Carolina Fisheries Association was also there. So they gave us the lowdown and the dire situation that was getting ready to happen in the legislature about this moratorium steering committee. So what we did was, at night, the auxiliary disbanded. We formed the Carteret County Fishermen's Association, and they had just developed at NCFA affiliates. Affiliates were different from auxiliaries in that they got 2 seats on the board and they got voting privileges. That I could live with. It was a men, women, anybody. So from that night on, we became Carteret County Fishermen's Association. And I'm still to this day a member of the Carteret County Fishermen's Association.
Do you remember why that happened? Why the auxiliaries were disbanded and this new structure started?
Because they were just, my sense, and I was not on the auxiliary. You had to ask them about that. But it was a small group anyway, and I just think that they were tired. They had been through, so...
Well, let me just interject one little PS to that.
Yeah.
I remember at one point the president of the auxiliaries did get a vote on the North Carolina Fisheries Association, and then it was taken away.
Oh my gosh.
It was taken away because the powers that be didn't agree with the position of some of these auxiliaries, which tended to represent more small boat fishermen. So that age-old conflict reached that point. And in my memory, that was one of the factors where it's like, why do we have this auxiliary? We're not here to bake cookies. Right? Okay, go on.
Well, that's good to know, and that's good to be interjected, because I didn't really know anything about the auxiliary. I didn't know why they were disbanding, but I knew that they were, and that's why this big meeting was happening. That's why Jerry Shield was happening, and I said, I don't know why you're having an auxiliary or any other kind of thing. I said, I'm not going to be a part of anything that we do not have a vote on. Forget it. That is not ever going to happen. I am not fundraising for anything without full disclosure of what they're doing financially and without a vote. That's just not going to happen. I said, now, you can do what you want to. Now, if you give us that, then I'll support you just to myself. Not that I matter to anybody, but I think that I'm speaking for a lot of people that were there at the time. There wasn't a lot said at the meeting about why the auxiliaries were going away. I think my sense of it was there was something that was strong that had happened for this to occur. Now, Pamlico County kept their auxiliary up until the ladies that were doing it just either died or got too old to do it, which does happen. But anyway, but back to the moratorium thing. So we get all up. What happened as a result of this big meeting in Davis was we also, another preamble that's important to know is right after this occurred, they fired the Division of Marine Fisheries Director, Freeman. And there were 13, if I remember right, and I could be very wrong about this, but I think the auxiliary was the ones that did it, or a faction of the auxiliary, sent 13 black wreaths to the Division of Marine Fisheries. 13 black funeral wreaths were sent to the Division of Marine Fisheries. Anyway, but obviously it was a bad time. It was a very dark time for everybody. So we go up there, we put on this, in like 3 days is this meeting that's going to be in Raleigh. So Carteret County Fishermen's Association took when they switched over, the auxiliary had $2,000 or $3,000, I think, in their account. We took that money and rented buses, and then everybody chipped in too and we took 400 head to Raleigh to this meeting in the LOB up there, the Legislative Office Building, and
during this scheduled session,
when they were hearing, it was no Fisheries Reform Act. This was about the moratorium.
The recommendations. Okay.
Coming out of that final report.
That's right.
So they were going to go vote on all this mess. So we took 400 of our people up there and went to this meeting. Couldn't speak. We were just there. We protested. We had signs and everything. Walked all around the Capitol Square and, got all of our permits, everything. And I know that I was on the elevator. I got stuck on the elevator. There were so many people on it with Jean Preston, bless her soul. and the elevator was like a foot up and then stopped. So we had to pry the door open and get Jean off the elevator. I mean, I'm claustrophobic. I thought I was going to pass out before I got off of there.
She was in the house at the time, right?
She was.
Yeah.
She was in the house. She was.
House of Representatives.
She and Jonathan, I think Ronnie Smith. We had three at the way districting was at the time.
Yeah, these are our legislators.
These are all legislators.
So you had to help.
Beverly was our senator.
You had to help.
So we had to help Jean get off that elevator, which I always thought, I always loved Jean. But that day, I was like, if I don't get off this elevator, I'm going to kill somebody or myself. But anyway, but that was, but I was talking about the elevator because I also got on the elevator with a sergeant at arms, who was a cool guy, and he was like, asked me who I was with, and I told him, and, of course they knew we were coming, and he was like, I must say that this is the most well-behaved group we've ever had of this size at the Capitol. And I mean, they thought, here comes these commercial fishermen, they're going to be raising hell, they are, and they're going to be fighting, and they're going to be very obnoxious people, and we were not at all. Although we have laid down the law pretty much, there was no rioting. We were going to be very organized, and we were. And so when we were coming home from that meeting, they voted not to do anything. They did not do anything. We also, there was a fellow named Robert Grady. He was also one of our people at the time.
Who was Robert Grady?
Robert Grady was a representative from Onslow County. So when we were coming home from that trip, that was, I think that trip right there was the turning point from where we are today. And I think from the people, Herbert, Herbert Morris, my husband, he cried on our way home. That tore me up. I was so angry. I still am very angry. Very angry.
Why?
That these people, these CCA people, who I could give you a string of curse words, because I despise them. I'll just tell you, and I don't say that lightly. I don't despise them as individuals, but what they do and their actions, and they don't know anything. They have zero knowledge. That's what I despise.
So they obviously then were at this big legislative...
Oh, they were. Their leader at the time was a guy named Dick Brain. But anyway, after this meeting, Carteret County Fishermen's Association continued to meet, see what they were going to do. Jonathan kept us informed. So,
but just
they wanted something to happen.
Yeah, but getting back to Herbert being so upset, were there specific things said at this meeting, or was that the first time the CCA kind of got on your radar as being very?
Well, they were upset. It was really one of the first times that I think it was an eye-opening thing. Because as I said before, nobody really even thought about recreational people. We always got along with them. There weren't no problems there that anybody ever knew about. These people were the only ones with any problems. We had never seen them before in our lifetime. And that's what we were all thinking. Because me and commercial fishermen that I've had contact with, as I said, leading up to this, you go to fisheries meetings, and it's intra-commercial fishermen issues that have to be resolved. It's not these external forces from Joe Blow, whoever they are. I just use CCA as an example, but there's several different examples that could be cited, but and there was this whole idea of we're just the low-hanging fruit here for larger problems like environmental problems and all this sort of thing, which in Carteret County I wouldn't say immune to environmental problems, but we certainly don't have as many as a more industrialized area like a Wilmington area down south that doesn't even have access to as large inside waters and all that as we do.
So maybe that moratorium meeting was just an early realization of the extent to which these people hold power and what they might do or were trying to do?
I think so.
Okay. So Pam, specifically when Jonathan was at that meeting in Davis talking about the recommendations coming out of this moratorium steering committee, was there anything in particular that bothered people, or was it just the whole thing?
I think, well, there were specifics about it. You know, a net ban for one thing.
But that
People were
wasn't part
afraid.
of the recommendation.
No, it wasn't. But it was being talked about. You know, it was being talked about at the same time.
It was.
And Frank Mitchell had introduced a net ban bill. That was the first one I ever remember, which was at the same time as this moratorium steering committee report was coming out, the exact same time. So they were, no, it wasn't a part of the report, but they were using the momentum from this report to do other things. That's what scared us. I mean, the word net ban, especially after Florida had just passed one, and they're not even talking about gill nets, they're talking about trawls, bottom disturbing gear.
So
that
it's just
would
the idea
be
that
devastating.
all this stuff is being done to us and we don't feel it.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you don't really think that they're going to do it. You don't really think that they're going to do it, but they do it.
I remember the representative that introduced the net ban kind of used that as a stick, saying, if y'all don't like the Fisheries Reform Act, maybe this is
yes.
There's some kind of talk like that at the time.
There was. They were using it, I guess you could call it a stick, or they were blackmail. Blackmail is what I called it. Like they were going to hold that over your head. And I was like, well, either they will or they won't. But bring it on. That was because all during from that day on, we go fight it out in the legislature. And we have never had anything done bad that went through the legislature. We had that, moratorium steering committee. We were just successfully had a moratorium put on course down. I say I didn't have a direct party into it, but those women did. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So I felt just as good about going and fighting it out in legislatures as I did anywhere. Mm-hmm. So, but after that failed, I thought after this blue ribbon mess failed and after the moratorium steering committee failed, there was reasons why they failed. Because they weren't worth a shit. Because people with their own agendas were driving the process.
But Jewel Wheatley, who represented the commercial fishing industry, was on the moratorium steering committee, and he and Bob Lucas came to be great friends and supporters of this.
They did.
Did you ever talk to Jewel about what was going on?
I did not talk to Jewel directly. Well, actually, I did. I told him I didn't appreciate it much. That for certain aspects of what we couldn't live with, but really, Jewel, you had to know Jewel though. You know what I mean? Yeah, he owned Beaufort Fisheries, which is a menhaden plant. He had a lot of terrible things done to him by people just like Bob Lucas. But on the other hand, he knew that he could get out of it. He could get out of it and he'd be just fine. He wasn't those poor devils that were working on the boat. Now, I love Jewel. Mm-hmm. I got along with him famously. But, and it's not just Jewel. I've come across a lot of people that were in it for number one. They weren't in it. They weren't in policy making committees and such as that for everybody. They were in it for themselves, and they were looking out for themselves. And people on commission are living that life right now. And maybe that's human nature or whatever. But I think the rule number one in my fisheries philosophy, rule number one is never go against another commercial fisherman. I don't care what they do. I don't care if they're clam leasers. I don't care what they are. If they're out fishing, especially fishing wild, I think that they should stand together. You can't have a gill net fisherman against a pound net fisherman and all this mess. Or crab potters against shrimp trawlers and all this. You're past that now.
Mm-hmm. So we know that even though that day the moratorium recommendations were not voted on, no action was taken, eventually some form of these recommendations did pass as the Fisheries Reform Act.
Well, you know how that came out, though.
Tell us.
Okay, so they had a committee meeting that we had heard about, Carteret County Fishermen's Association. And I didn't work at the time, so I could go. So I dropped Candace off, and I dressed up, and I went. I had never been to anything like this.
Where was it?
It was in Raleigh, in the LOB, and there was a meeting in there. Gene Preston was there, but the main one, in fact, I don't even know if Gene was there. The main one driving that train was a guy named David Redwine, who represented Brunswick County, and who claimed that he had been a commercial fisherman, which I still don't believe, but he was the insurance salesman is what he was down there, and he may have been a real estate agent. I can't remember. I think he was both, whatever. So he was a representative at the time, called this meeting. Todd Miller was there from the Coastal Fed. Anyway, there was some that I recognized. Most of them I didn't. None of them didn't know me because I had never been a part of it. And that worked for me. That worked to my advantage because I was dressed up and people were wondering, who was that? You know. So they were having, because David Redwine said they're put too much in this moratorium thing to let it go. And Bob Lucas was behind it. Bob Lucas was an attorney, but very powerful politically. Governor Hunt was in office at the time. So they felt like something had to be done. And the reason they felt that way was because CCA was blackmailing them, I think, to push it. And in other ways, it had gone, you know, it had gone so far that they wanted something to come out of it because they had put money in these other two projects and hadn't gotten anywhere. Well, that's because they were bad projects. They put money in something that you should know right off ain't going to work. So that was what was behind it. So I went to this committee meeting, and they had several. So David Redwine was pushing it. Well, then he got Gene Preston to sign on to it, and they developed a bill, and they were the two co-sponsors, which became the Fisheries Reform Act in 1997. So Jeff Hudson, who is a quasi-friend of mine, who develops bills for the legislature. Mm-hmm. He's in research. He's a staffer. So I got to know this Jeff guy. I think he may have been an attorney, and that's the thing he worked in. But I met him through Seafood and Aquaculture because he was the staffer adjunct to the committee and would advise that committee. So I noted who was in charge, and I got to know them people. When I went up to, I'll tell you who else was in that Redwine meeting. That was Charlie Alberson, mm-hmm. who used to be a representative. Was he senator? He was a senator. Yeah. From Duplin County, who was a great guy. So, which I didn't know him before this, but he apparently had performed on Cedar Island he was a Democrat, and Cedar Island was a Democrat stronghold, you know. So, anyway, I started going to these meetings, in other words, and I would report. I went that first one. I reported back to Carteret County Fishermen's Association, and we had probably 20 people that would come every single week. So that's how we started meeting about it. We met every single week till it was passed, wow. And we would review the bill, see what had changed. Like, for example, we had some very important things that were, I don't know how we did it, but that were put in there. For example, we had assignability wrote into the Fisheries Reform Act because we were like, what if you're sick? What if you can't run your boat? You know, is your boat, because the underlying kernel of Fisheries Reform Act is licensing is not on the boat anymore, it's on the individual. That was a huge change. That is the core of the Fisheries Reform Act. That kernel that is all built around is that concept. So we had assignability, so if you were sick or you got hurt or whatever, you could still work. Your license could still be used and you could still have some income. Also, for people who own multiple boats, like in a long haul operation or a crab pot operation, especially when you've got people that may have 2,000 pots, but they've got 150 assigned to Joe and 150 assigned to Tom, Dick, and Harry, and he's got all the boats to do it with. Also, there are other fisheries that this happens in, but crabs is one of the main ones. So that you can have all these licenses, and people like I know got sea level held 7 licenses. Some were clam boats, some were long haul boats, some were shrimp boats. You know, so he had all these different kinds of boats because licenses weren't $35 under the moratorium, under the license moratorium. So that was another thing that we had done was transferability, assignability, transferability to where if you sell your boat, you can transfer the license because that's where the value of the boat was going to become. We knew was not going to be in the boat necessarily itself, but in license because it was going to the individuals. Before you were selling your boat, and the boat held the license.
Right.
You know,
So you could have more than one license after the moratoriums, after the Fisheries Reform Act, but they were assigned to you, not the boats.
you owned the license,
Yeah.
right? They became your license. They were removed from the boat number, and they were put on. Remember the endorsement to sell?
Yes,
That was the precursor.
So I've never heard this part of the story that you went to all these meetings after the big fiasco.
Oh yeah,
and
every week.
Reported back to the Carteret Fisheries Association here. How did you all get your input? Through Jonathan? How did you get your input?
Jonathan came to all of our meetings, and he was very smart about that stuff. Very smart. And he would give us advice, and I would take it back to my house and type it up. And we sent it to Jean. And we sent it to the other, we sent it to Jean, we sent it to Red Wine, but mainly Jean, because she was one of the co-sponsors, what became the co-sponsor.
Right.
And we sent it to Beverly. Beverly Perdue was our senator at the time. That was before she was lieutenant governor. She was our senator, and she was chairman of appropriations.
Yeah.
So she was in a seat of power. She had way more power in my mind. I didn't know anything about it, but I felt like she had more power as a senator than she did as the lieutenant governor.
Or governor.
Or governor, yes, because your hands are so tied, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, but there was one other thing I did want to mention that we had done through all this, and that was the cost of a commercial fishing license. It started off as being $250. Now, you know, say this guy from Sea Level owns 7 licenses, that's $250 a piece. What in the world there, you know? That's going to be a lot of money. So even though we tried to get it down to $100, because you got to know it was $35, you know. So you're going up $250. So, but that had a big impact like on today. So we got it down to $200. Also, something else that happened with licensing was the fact that North Carolina is a public trust state, and limited entry is illegal in this state. Now, I didn't know they could change the law any time, but at that time, that was a serious thing. So there had to be a way in. It was against the law for them to put a cap on commercial fishing license at whatever was out there. You had to have a way in. So before they have a thing that they call the hardship panel, this hardship committee. I went through the hardship committee over a crab license because these agents, one of the agents from Harker's Island forgot to give us our crab endorsement. And you were SOL if that happened. So we had to go battle it out, and that was not easy, let me tell you something, to get that crab license back. That was an act of Congress. So they did away with this hardship thing that was in the old rules, and they developed what they referred to as eligibility panel for commercial fishing license because you had to have a way in. So they set it at 500.
500 cap.
That was the cap, was 500. There's 500 chances for people to get in because
there was 500 additional
chances.
I can't remember what the initial cap was. Was it like?
It was 500.
No, but the number of fishermen, wasn't it like 6,500?
No, it was 8,000 something.
Oh, 8,000. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
That
okay.
and that was not individual fishermen. You got to remember that these licenses that turned over from the endorsement to sale, they were on the boat. See what I'm saying? They weren't on the individual.
Right. Okay.
The individual wound up holding them all. So you could be one man and you could have 7 licenses.
I got you.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but the original cap was 500.
saying that we will allow this to expand by 500 and no more.
No more.
Okay.
Exactly.
It's not saying that there will be 500 fishermen in North Carolina.
No, no.
Okay.
It was saying there's 500 more chances
Okay. Gotcha.
additional to what we've got now, with licenses to what we've got now, which is different than people, right?
Yeah.
So, so it went up, 2 or 3 times. We did beat it down to $200, which, it was something at least. We didn't get our $100, but at least we got $50 knocked off of it. So, as a matter of course, or whatever, those are the things, I guess, while I'm trying to stay on this topic, those are the things that we had the greatest impact on, was licensing, was assignability, transferability, and and the cost of the license. And also the fact that you could not cap the license at a hard number at what they were, because you had to have a weigh in. And those were the main things that we got done. Also, I don't know where you're at with your question, and if you want me to get into that right now at all about what happened after implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you're there yet or whatever.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go. Yeah. Talk about. But I just thought that was really interesting. I never heard that story that you all week to week during that period of time.
Well, the
went
interesting
through every
thing.
Little thing and put your.
Well, the interesting thing though was me. That's how I met and got to be, which I'd met them, but I wasn't, But Sandy Gaskell and Janice Smith and I became thick as thieves because we were the 3 that went every week.
Okay.
And we would take various and sundry other people with us, like Jonathan went with us, or he'd go on his own and meet us there. Paul Smith, there to Cedar Island, he went with us a bunch of times. He's another interesting character. And those were the main ones.
How do you
that
think
went.
those legislators felt when they saw you women coming?
I think that they admired us in a way for being so dedicated. I mean, because most of those people didn't know what was going on. They don't care about fish. They didn't know anything about fish, don't care. They just want to be able to go to a restaurant and eat a fish. That's all they care about. Hopefully from North Carolina, if you're in the legislature. So that's all they cared about. But we would go, like, say, I mean, the 3 of us, we had a lot of adventures. And I know I've told you some of them, but they're just too priceless to forget. Because it was just, but we fought tooth and nail for everything. So at the time, the president pro tem of the Senate was Mark Bassnight. And Mark, I had never met. Only thing I knew about Mark Bassnight was he was the president pro tem of the Senate, therefore, and was a coastal legislator. So therefore, we needed to go talk to him. So after the committee meetings, we always found somebody to go talk to. So first time we went to Bassnight's office. Well, Janice knew everybody anyway, through the years as a fish dealer. Janice says, yeah, I know Mark. I said, well, let's go talk to him. So here the 3 of us go. And we get there to his office, and he's got all kinds of staff and whatnot in the legislative building on the 2nd floor, in the corner, in the blue corner. So we get in there, and he was busy with somebody. He gave us a guy named Rolf Blizzard. Now, Rolf Blizzard, oh my Lord. We talked to that man, I bet, for 2 hours. We told him everything you can imagine, way more than he wanted to know about fisheries. And I'll never forget, he pointed to a picture on the wall from Dare County who had a barge full of oysters. I mean, it was rounded up, big as this room, oyster barge that they were hauling to Virginia, I think. Anyway, he was like, I want oysters to be just like that. And I thought, this was taken like in the 1800s sometime, probably mid-1800s, I would say. I said, honey, all I know is you got a long way to go before you get to that point, because them days are over. And that's for a variety of reasons. So anyway, but he was a great guy, and we talked to him and he got to know us, and we got to know him. Then Senator Bass Knight come, and he talked to us another 20 or 30 minutes. So we got things done. And Janice would say, Mark, now I'm going to tell you, we've got to have this and this and this. And if Billy were here, he'd be here telling you the same thing, more or less.
Her husband was Billy Smith, the most
Billy
powerful
Smith.
seafood dealer in North Carolina, who
Yes.
was tragically killed in a boating accident.
Correct.
Yeah.
And anyway, but Janice, that was Janice's way. Well, Sandy's way was she would be, she's so honest and straightforward that she just draws you in. I'm the one who's the behind the scenes one, is the one I am, or the one that'll just snatch a knot in you, or kind of way, So anyway, so that was one of our times. Another time I remember specifically when we were up there, of course, Bruce Freeman had been fired. They had done through all this mirage or compilation or morass of things that were happening all at one time. They got rid of the fisheries director, which he weren't worth 2 cents riding or walking. He stayed locked up in his office all the time, is what he did. He was scared to come out. I couldn't blame him for that. But still, it weren't right what he done. So they got rid of him. They did an audit on the division, a full audit, not just a financial audit, but a from top to bottom audit. Ralph Campbell did it, gave a report, which basically said the division was in shambles, morale was in the basement, and it was a mess. So we agreed with that, of course, and it was a mess. It was a bloody mess. I knew plenty of people I thought the world of at the division. And they tell you things, this and that, but they couldn't do anything about it.
But what was your second memory of those times in Raleigh with the women?
Well, the second memory is what I'm getting to, has to do with this director. When we were in the cafeteria of the legislative building, we met Preston. That's where we met Preston Pate. And that day, who became the next director eventually, but Preston Pate was the director of CAMA, and had applied for this Division of Marine Fisheries Director job and had interviewed with Beverly Perdue right before we saw him for that job, for the director's job. And he came there, I saw him talking to Jonathan, who was a couple of tables over from 3 of us, and then he came over and sat down with us and talked to us. And was like, if the director, I'm going to I've been instructed, that we've got to get out in the community more and see, what the needs of our constituents and the people we serve are, which was like a big fat nothing on the audit, you know what I mean? So it was just as nice a feller as ever been. So we enjoyed meeting him. That was one of the highlights. Was he wasn't even the director then, but we knew he was going to be hired because we would always go talk to Beverly, and we did that day. We went by and talked to her, and she said she talked to him and all this. So another time that was especially amusing, thinking back, that we just laugh about to this day, had to do with Representative David Redwine, and he was in a committee and was describing as to how he knew all this stuff about commercial fishermen because he had been shrimping a time or two. Well, let me tell you, Sandy and I were both shrimp fishermen, and that didn't sit real well with us. So we took off after this committee meeting was over because he was just saying that for people to agree with him. Like, he was from Brunswick County and he knew all this, so therefore, because that's how it's done in Raleigh. However the person sitting beside you votes, do you live here? Okay, well, how should I vote? That's how it's done, right?
Yeah.
So, because they go, why should they know anything about it, really? I wouldn't expect them to. So, I saw him. So, the way these rooms are set up, you've got in the far side of the room, there's a raised dais looking thing, and it's got chairs, and you've got the person that's running the meeting up there and some staff people up there. On the sides, you have desk-like things where the committee members sit. Then there's a bar. The audience sits behind the bar, and you can't speak unless you're actually asked to speak. That does not happen very often. So we were in this meeting, and he was saying all this, and he had already had encounters with us before then. Because, like I say, we talked to people after it was over every time. We just found whoever we could grab, and we told them what we were thinking. So he took off out the far end because they had these escape doors. Well, we said, honey, I don't think so. You're not getting away from us, not today. So he tried to evade us. So I caught sight of him when I darted out, like I do. That was my role in things. So I darted out the door, saw where he went, and I took off after him. Well, he got to the bottom of this stairwell and went around the corner, and there was like restrooms sitting in an alcove up in there. So he had darted in toward them restrooms up in there. Well, I had blown past him wide open in my high heels. Well, little did he know that Janice and Sandy were coming behind the same stairwell behind me. And when he thought the coast was clear, he walked out, and Sandy Gaskell grabbed a hold of him. My God.
Legislator.
The legislator.
Caught by a fisherman.
Yes. Oh, my Lord. It was the greatest moment ever. My Lord. And bless his heart, he's probably still down there. And I'm sure what he thought he was doing was the right thing. But we knew it wasn't the right thing. We were not going to face any more restrictions on any more shrimp trawls. No, sir. We were not going to do that.
What'd you tell him when you caught him?
Oh, we told him he was not a shrimp fisherman right to start off with. And how was he out there talking all this mess about shrimp fishing when he didn't know a damn thing about it? That was the gist of it. Oh, I thought he was going to cry before it was over with. So we, anyway, those are the three top things. Oh, and the one last thing, and I'll, but this was a great story. Senator Charlie Albertson, I always went to see, and he was one of our regular visits. We always went Mark Bass nights just to say we were there. We always went to Charlie Albertson's office to check in with him. Always went to Gene Preston. Always went to Beverly Purdue, and we'd go see Robert Grady sometimes. He was up there. Those were the main stops. But if somebody said something in a committee that we needed to straighten them out, we would go find them after the committee meeting. So we had those people, but when we went to Charlie Alberson's office, it was one of the first times we ever went up there, because he was co-chairing a meeting, and maybe that was a seafood and aquaculture, but there were all these different ones we went to. I can't keep them all straight. So Gene and Charlie Alberson were the co-chairs. Charlie was running the meeting. So after the meeting was over, we go by and talk to him. And he was, at the time, the hog farmers were having a hard time. And I think a lot of what Charlie's thing was, hey, he was a Bass Night man. Whatever Bass Night said, he was going to do it. And ain't no problem with that, as far as I'm concerned. So, but that was just something you had to understand. And also, he represented Duplin County hog farmers who were under a lot of stress of their own. They were being mommed, as they say, because they got to live too. And everybody was putting, just like they were doing them, the same exact way they were doing the commercial fishermen, tormenting them to death because of all these things, because they could do it. They were the low-hanging fruit of people to persecute, was the hog farmers and commercial fishermen. So the developers of the world can do whatever they want to do, is what it basically amounted to, in my view. So, anyway, we go to see Charlie. And we had parked out 11 blocks away, because we didn't know what we were doing, and hiked to the legislative office building. I was pretty bad off. I had heels on. That was back when I deemed to wear heels. I don't wear heels no more. But, needless to say, we were bad off, because we had to hike the whole way back. So we were in Janice's brown Lincoln, a big old car of hers. We get to Kinston, I'm always the driver, okay, so I'm always driving. Get to Kinston to get gas. Who do we see in the gas station but Charlie Alberson? He says, ladies, I've got a gig at the Hootenanny tonight, and you all should come out dancing. And I was like, hell no, I don't think so bad off as I am. Now, oh my Lord, we did some laughing.
He was our singing senator.
He was.
And he has CDs and he performed regularly. Okay.
Yes, and Jonathan told me when he was in the legislature, Charlie went there and put a CD on all the desks. Gave everybody. I said, man, I'd love to have a CD in Charlie Alberson's. Because I remember he used to play around, Carteret County. And Ronald Goodwin, George Goodwin's daddy, there at Raleigh, he used to get him come play for their Democrat fundraisers, which they used to have a lot at St. Raleigh.
Yeah.
So he was a great guy, though, man. I'm telling you, we met some great people up there.
So while you're telling these stories of that time, you told me a story recently that was really funny when a former Marine Fisheries Commissioner, Pete Moffett, came in here and told you something about Janice Smith. Tell that story.
Well, Pete was on the Marine Fisheries. He was one of the first commissioners after the Fisheries Reform Act passed, and he was a recreational fisherman. And oh Lord, he was for me, Janice and Sandy, he was aggravatingest thing that's ever been. Oh my Lord, he was he was hard to deal with. He wouldn't see reason. There was no reasoning with the man. So anyway, but I never had anything against him personally. But he was just one of those that's how he felt about things, and and whatever. He saw that anyway. But Janice didn't like him at all. Well, I didn't like him much, neither did Sandy, because he was so damn aggravating. So he come in here. Now this fast forward to now, 20 years later.
Poor Miss Janice has passed away.
Yeah, Janice is gone. Don't seem right, but she is anyway. So Pete is a decoy carver. And or a wildfowl carver, but it's mainly primitive pieces or old style things or interpretive pieces, things like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So he brings them into the museum. Well, I'd seen him a couple of times through the years. Anyway, well, I was glad to see him, and we were talking about this and that. And he said, we're standing in Billy's room over there. Billy Smith's room, and he said, I always got along with Billy, and he was a county commissioner and all that, and had lunch with him, and got to talk about things. And he said, but Janice was a pill. He said, she one time told me in a fisheries meeting that if she had her way, we were in New Bern at the meeting. I remember the meeting. The river would run with his blood. And I was like, I don't doubt that for 1 minute. Because Janice, she was right. She was tired of it. She was tired of it, and we all were tired of it. Because, again, what kind of way is it your business to start off with? No. I still feel that way. They can say what they want to about public trust.
Yeah. So here we are. Crap. 20 years almost that the Fisheries Reform Act has been in effect. You have probably been more part of the system than anybody. You've been on the Central Committee, which is now the Southern Committee. You're on the Eligibility Board, or you're still on the Southern Committee. You have been involved in many ways, shapes, and forms. So just overall, as we come up to the 20th year, is there parts of the act that you say that was a good thing? Or are there parts that should be changed? Or, how do you feel about it?
Well, I think in the beginning, once you kind of got used to the way it was going, it was okay. The license change, you can kind of deal with it. It didn't weed anybody out. People paid the extra money, or they let their extra licenses go. That's why there's so many in the pool now. That was a result of license fees. Some people have gotten out of it. Some people hold on to their license. I think up until this new governor came into office, it had stayed basically the same. I think it was a process that had been weakening through changes in directorship. I think in the beginning the process worked good with all the advisory committees. The guy who was running all the committees, Jess, did a really
Hawkins?
good job on running those committees. Um, After he retired, the emphasis on the committees went down. After the new director came on board, emphasis on the committees went down even further.
Which means there was less public input.
There was, and what public input there was is not being considered by the commission at all. So that's not good. It has been slowly being weakened in the last since Preston Pate retired. That's the crux of it right there. I think the fisheries management plans have been used in the wrong way. I was not actually for them in the beginning. NCFA decided through negotiations that they were going to support fisheries management plans. I think that if they would have left it the way it were in the beginning and stayed to those high standards that they had at the time, in that everybody, for example, from the committees, you were expected to have a member like I've been on a committee since 1998. First, I was on the Central Committee, as you say, and I was a co-chairman of that. Now I'm on the Southern Committee when they did away with two of the committees and made a super committee, which makes things even more watered down because Carteret County is now in with Pender, South, not so much Onslow, they're kind of more Carteret County. But like Pender County on South, we ain't got no business with them. They're a totally different way of doing things than we are. And being grouped with them, we should not be grouped with them. We should be grouped with the Northern Committee, not the Southern Committee. But to keep it, because we sit in the middle of the state, that's why we wound up in the Southern Committee. Because they've got a lot less region than we do. And they would have even less if they didn't have Carteret County. But it's just, that's an example of how a good process has just been weakened and weakened. And it's now undergoing further weakening. With fisheries management plans, with the composition of the Marine Fisheries Commission, which I hear now is going to 7. That could be a plus or a minus. I'm not sure. Depends. It doesn't matter if you got 25. You've served on it when they had a lot on there. They had 17 people on the commission at one time. I thought it was a lumbering behemoth myself. But, I was pleased when it took it to 9. But again, that hinges on having sensible people. And sensible people who are making decisions. I mean, we had good people on the commission at first. People that believed in hearing others out and getting the whole story. It's not that way at all now for many of the commission members, in my view. It's, the commission is as screwed up at its mess I have ever seen in my life. I think that they should throw every single soul off of it right now and start over. But whoever's doing the appointing, they have to not pick yes men, for one thing. And they need people like they used to have, like the Joe Clems of the world, and the Norm Bradfords, who was an Audubon. Norm was a great guy. And they were sensible people who made sensible decisions. The people you've got now are a bunch of radicals who are just in there to create chaos and put the commercial fishermen out of business. That's all they are. They have no expertise at all. They have no expertise. There's no science being used. You look at this whole debacle of, the recent debacle of speckled trout. Speckled trout was the most, how do you say it? That was the most screwed upest thing. There was no science involved in speckled trout. They produced a report that said one thing. All they did was just holler about something else. That was nothing but CCA. They have a plan to get things done. They're following their plan. They just say things with no basis whatsoever, and get people to vote their way.
For the listener, let me remember, speckled trout is a fishery that's very susceptible to cold weather and
sort of. It's got to be really cold weather,
right?
For a long time.
From what I remember, there were some high mortality rates that the fishermen pointed to freezes, but nonetheless, very severe restrictions were put on the commercial harvest.
What happened with speckled trout was there was no problem with speckled trout. There was no biological problem with them. There was no science that even supported that. Yes, there are cold stun events, but those were not in the norm. They happened every 4 or 5 years. That was and that's also natural mortality. That's not fishing mortality. So they were trying to say that there was a problem with speckled trout when there was not, and they put on additional, and there was no science that supported it. Their white paper said that you're going to have cold stun events, but that's about it. And because speckled trout grow real fast, it's just, I don't want to get into it, but they're not like red drum who live a long time and all this stuff.
But tell us, how many can a fisherman catch now? A commercial fisherman?
What, speckled trout?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't even know if they can catch any speckled trout now.
Okay.
I mean, at certain times they can. It's like 25 fish or something like that.
It's a very small number, which has impacted long haul fishing for one thing, right?
Oh, long haul. They put them directly out of it. I mean, Bradley and them have caught 300 boxes of speckled trout, which means, that's 300 boxes. That's 30,000 pounds of speckled trout.
And so now,
that's not all the time, but sometimes they will catch a lot.
So if they're limited to 25, 30 fish, which I can't remember the number, they
right.
can't
Well,
do that
all it is, that was the whole point of it. But there's no biology. The people catching the speckled trout, the ratio is recreational catching 70% of speckled trout. Commercial fishermen are catching 30%. Yeah. Plus, there's no in the biomass. There's no downsizing of the biomass of speckled trout. It's just once in a while, once every 3 or 4 years, if that often, there will be a hard freeze in Carteret County or wherever these trout are holed up.
Yeah.
And they'll go belly up because the water's cold. Well, so what? It does not affect them one way or the other in the long run.
Yeah.
And they were trying to say that it was affecting them. This is a trend that started with speckled trout that is happening now. They're trying to implement the same plan, and that is the lack of science and the use of a supplement process to put on emergency rules when no emergency exists. And after the emergency, according to them, is over, i.e. when the next stock assessment comes out, because they put off the speckled trout stock assessment because they knew it was going to say there's no problem with speckled trout, so they didn't release that so they could get these emergency rules on. I was there in the commission meeting at the end of speckled trout speculations and discussions. It came right after a flounder talk, which a lot of commercial fishermen went to, but they left too soon. And so I stayed for that speckled trout part. But when they talked about speckled trout, nobody on the commission, not our people, not their people, they said, just the division man says, just so you get an update on speckled trout, the stock assessment is here, and it says, joy, there's no problems. We won't need any more rules of speckled trout. But did anybody make the motion to disband and get rid of those emergency rules that they didn't need in the first place? No. That's, Barbara, the problem right there.
Gotcha.
And that's why they're doing with flounder. In fact, they even with flounder, because with flounder, when that came in, and they were talking about that, they went through all these steps of a lot of chatter about how bad off it was with no substance. They were just saying it was, the old theory, you say it enough times and it will be. They were implementing that with flounder. Then they get in a commission meeting, and since there's no science and their quote unquote stock assessment will not pass a peer review, so therefore they cannot use it for fisheries management plan purposes. Okay, so you get the Marine Fisheries Commission. Their yes men are in place, so they got that 5-4 vote, right?
Yep.
So when they get there, what do? They pull quote unquote options out of their ass with no science at all. They knew what they were going to do. Zero. That was when, what's her name? God bless America. What is her name?
Anna Beckwith.
Anna Beckwith, George's wife, was on the commission, stands up and says, we're going to handle this. The commission's going to handle this, talking about flounder, ourselves. None of them with zero expertise. They couldn't do anything because the division, their paperwork, because why wouldn't their paperwork pass? Because they're trying, in my view, to manipulate it to make flounder look like there's a problem there when there ain't no problem there. Just like they did with speckled trout, right?
Yeah.
So you've got this all going on, Barbara.
Yeah.
That cannot go on. Well, now, where are we at? Division director's out on his ass. Got rid of him. I don't know why. Some say it's because the CCA got him out. But this is all a part of the weakening. But it's not even weakening. This is full circle here. This is full circle, baby. We've been through all this stuff over 20 years. You know, Milton Starn always talked about cycles of fish and a 20-year cycle. I believe that theory, man, I'm telling you, because we're right now in the fisheries reform 20-year cycle. So here we go. We're rolling back around. We're not paying any attention to these advisors and whatever. We're decreasing advisory committees. Anyway. So now we're back here. We got rid of a division director. He's out. We don't know who. Well, we do know who. Now that's being combined with CAMA. How ironic. That's where Pest and Pate come out of, of course.
Division of
And, so they've come around back to that. And so, now they're questioning, what is the effectiveness of the Fisheries Reform Act. So here we are, man. We're here back full circle.
They're even talking about definition of a commercial fisherman.
And they have been. I can tell you all about that, too.
Well,
I was there when they were doing, because you know where that definition came from? It came from the eligibility panel.
Okay.
Because we had to define what constitutes a commercial fisherman.
But those of us that have been in the game for a long time see these same things come back around.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing new out there. Nothing. Well, when we decided on eligibility panel in 1998, when we first convened, that what was going to be significant involvement and who were going to be considered commercial fishermen. And I said, because that you had to meet certain criteria for eligibility. You had to be involved in commercial fishing to be eligible for a commercial fishing license from us, right? So what we decided on was if you were holding a standard commercial fishing license, it didn't matter if you used it or not. If you hold a standard commercial fishing license, you are a commercial fisherman, right?
Right.
And because some people may do it this year and be a carpenter next year and then be a fisherman the year after next or 10 years from now. I don't really care. But they'll be fishing on and off most of the time if they're holding a fishing license of some kind. Okay, then we had this question of what is significant involvement. Because you have to be significantly involved in commercial fishing activities, which is defined. That was another definition. What does that mean? So commercial fishing is defined as someone engaged in the sale of fish. Engaged in the sale of fish. That's what it means. It doesn't mean you've gone out there and caught mahi or mullet and giving it to your church fish fry. That's not commercial fishing, even if you're using a gill net. Because people tend to think about, if I'm using commercial fishing gear, therefore I'm a commercial fisherman.
Right.
No, you're not. So, or you've got the other recreational tuna fishing faction who want to sell their tuna under that, where NIMS came out with that general tuna license. Remember that? Well, that came about the same time as eligibility, and we got this flood of recreational fishermen wanting to be commercial fishermen. And we were not going to let that happen because used to, like charter boats, were considered to be commercial fishermen. They were, and really it was CCA's doings behind their back. They were the ones that determines how they were too good to be commercial fishermen. And I remember telling George Hirsch, who was the attorney at the time we're first meeting for, because when we were first meeting for eligibility, I was like, yeah, charter boat people are commercial fishermen. I mean, they're involved in catching fish, and those fish basically are for sale because they're selling the opportunity to catch those fish. That was how I thought about it. Well, he said no, that they had that taken out of the people who were eligible or could hold like an endorsement to sell. They took them out of it. They asked when Fisheries Reform Act went through to be taken out of being a commercial fisherman. I said, well, they were stupid, weren't they? He said, yes, they were. And now, they're like doing whatever. I want my commercial fishing license. I said, well, you should have put it in to that bunch of CCA people, that were getting you out of it. Now, the old timers like Sonny Boy in that crowd, who are not dingbatters, basically, they've still got theirs, honey, and they do it the way it's always been done. That's the way it's always been done. They're all commercial fishermen. They're not daggone no recreational fishermen because they're a charter boat. They're commercial fishermen. Yeah. But whatever.
So what do you think the future is of Fisheries Reform Act? Do you think it's going to be revamped? Is it going to be rescinded? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, right now, I do not know. I think it could, actually, personally, I think it could go either way with the governor that we've got now and the secretary we've got now, because at the same time they got rid of that old division director, they got rid of the department, with the secretary of the department, and they changed the department.
Oh, so, Diener, there's no more
There's
Diener.
no more Diener.
Yeah.
There's no more Diener. There's no more seafood and aquaculture. There's no more, what was the other one? The division director no longer only has a division. He's also got CAMA. How's that going to work? Mm-hmm. Because the division of Marine Fisheries is huge. Does that mean that they're leaning toward, there's been, the commercial fishermen rather be in aquaculture anyway, or in agriculture, not aquaculture, no. The commercial fishermen rather be in agriculture.
Under the Department of Agriculture.
Under the Ag Department, yes. Much rather. And some factions have been trying to get in there for a long time.
Is that because of the emphasis on food?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we deal in commodities, not a good time. You know what I mean? We're commodities-based people. Yeah. And we are actually far more like the farmers than we were our fishermen. The reason I think that won't never happen is that is because of the federal government and all the councils that we're in. That's another thing is federal councils. I wish we would replace our representatives on the federal councils, especially the South Atlantic Council. Since the former director is not there anymore, I think that they should redo who's on those councils, especially the South Atlantic Council. That's been an awful council for a long time. Preston Pate was actually on the Mid-Atlantic Council for a long, long time, even after he retired. But they even took Preston off of the Mid-Atlantic Council. And that is never good. So I think that they should just look at the people and try to get more sensible people that are willing to do it. That's another thing. You got to have people that are actually willing to do the job.
Right.
So, they've had a guy on the commission that lasted exactly one meeting. But, I've said plenty here today that people aren't going to like, but
Yeah.
I said the way I thought about it,
Yeah.
and so
Right.
nothing new there. I tell you, there are people who fight, and they're always like right now. I don't fight like I used to fight. I just can't. I'm too busy at the museum now, but Sandy Gaskell, she's fought longer and harder than anybody.
Yeah.
And she doesn't fight like she used to now because, let's face it, we're all getting old.
Yeah, who's the next generation?
Some of these, there's got to be another generation of fighters. And I think they're coming up. You've got to get to a certain age to know enough to even be a fighter. You can't know enough. You can't live long enough to know all there is about fisheries. You know that. You can't. It's too complex. You can't. I love talking like the fisheries about you because I don't have to explain everything. But fisheries is so damn complicated. You cannot explain it to where innocent bicycles, that couple come in here and you can explain any of this to them. You can't do it. It's too complicated. And you can't, if you try to pare it down, you're going to leave something out that's important that conveys the meaning and the implications of the bigger picture. And with fisheries, you must always contemplate the bigger picture. You cannot leave that out. And that's why I get a little aggravated at people. And it's just in my nature. That's just in my nature. I try to fight it. I try to fight it. But, when you get people that come in that just don't know anything, it's not their fault. But I've seen people who place themselves in supposed positions of power. I won't say there's any power there, but they're seeking power. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And they don't know enough. They need to go home. Or they need to just be there to listen to do what other people tell them to do and keep their mouth shut until they know enough. And I've observed that a lot over the last 10 years, I would say, when the hard work has been done already and it's maintenance that's happening now. The hard work was done when that damn meeting came up that we hauled 400 people. That was the nitty gritty right there. I didn't think it could have been any worse than it was that day. I've never been to a worse meeting than that one was. And it wasn't any one thing, it was just the whole thing. And that net band wandering about from Frank Mitchell.
Yeah.
That was a bad time. On our way home, we stopped, I remember the best, we stopped there at King's Barbecue in Kinston. And this is why I'll always love King's Barbecue. Not because of their barbecue, because of the people that run that place. That Wilbur King was there, who's apparently an uncle of Ruthie King and Faye's. Yeah, who would know? But anyway, he was there, and we stopped there, and that bus bat off. It was at night. It was at least 8 o'clock, going on 9. And we walked in there, a bunch of scraggly commercial fishermen, and he was tickled to death. He wouldn't let us pay for nothing. He said, whatever you want. He knew we had been through something that day. And I will never forget that as long as I live. That was between that and just seeing the impacts. Seeing it, it was dawning on me, hell. Just seeing the impacts. And I swore that day I will fight till I'm dead over this. And that's why I still fight today. I don't have a dog in the fight now. I'm not fishing, and Herbert's not fishing either. He works Cherry Point. Cody's not fishing, but I don't care. I will be a fisherman in here until I am dead, which ain't going to be too much longer.
In your heart.
In my heart.
Yeah.
I will be a fisherman until I am 6 feet under or burnt up, one or the other. And it is morally wrong what's being done. Morally and ethically wrong. So, that's all I know to say about it, and you've heard more than you wanted to. And I've said more than I wanted to, which I usually do.
Well, thank you, Pam. And for the record, we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's too. There are just so many people that, this project, as we've talked about, just needs to be done now.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody's got to go over there and talk to Sandy, and got to go talk to Albert, and got to go talk to Glenn, Glenn Hatter, Glenn Skinner, Adam. Those are going to be the new fighters. Those are going to be the new fighters. Brent Fulcher.
Yep.
Brent Fulcher. Somebody needs to go get him. He's the next generation. Brent Fulcher, I'm going to tell you something about Brent Fulcher. And I don't care if he hears this and knows it. But since Billy Smith died, there has been a void that was never filled. I remember when he died, I thought that was before the moratorium report too, and all that. That was some of the worst mess that went on in that mid-90s. Oh my gosh, it was. They think it's bad now. Now ain't shit compared to what it was then. I just can't describe how bad it was. But Brent is now stepping up to be the new Billy Smith. And thank God. Because you've got people that could have done it. You got that gang in Pamlico County that could have done it. But they wouldn't put their money where their mouth was. Right?
Right.
You got some crowd in this county that could have done it. Wouldn't put their money where their mouth was. But he's willing to invest. And that's the difference.
Yep.
Back when NCFA got started, Elmer Willis, Nancy Willis Lewis now's daddy, Elmer, he invested. He was the one that started him and Clayton Fulcher. Once they died out, what's happened to Clayton Fulcher? Ain't no more Clayton Fulchers. He turned over in his grave if he knew what happened to Clayton Fulcher seafood. Janice would turn over in her grave. Well, Janice knew it was coming. But Janice would have hit it head on. Janice wouldn't have been, she would have been proud of it the way it is now. I think Brent's done a great job. I'm glad it happened. Because...
Yeah, because Brent bought
and
Billy
has
Smith's
fit Billy Smith's place, T.B. Smith's place.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That was T.B.'s place.
Oh, that place.
His original place.
I was thinking of...
That used to be tons of seafood went through T.B. Smith's.
Yeah.
Well, T.B. was Gary's daddy,
That's
of course.
right.
Yeah, they divided the property up. Philip Smith had the fish house. Gary had the boat railways.
So the good news is there is a new generation.
Yes, that's the good news. That's what keeps me going.
Yep.
And, you've got Bradley and them, who's not exactly the new generation, but he's leading, he's shepherding the new generation, I think.
Yeah.
And because some of the new generation, I'm telling you, won't think they know everything. But they don't know everything. They don't know everything. They think they do, but they do not. They have not been where we've been. And I'm glad they haven't. I don't want them to go through all that. But again, it's coming back around, and they're going to have to stand and fight.
Well, that's part of the reason Susan put in for this project, because I think the history is so important. How have we come to be where we are today? Where did all this come from? Who were the players? What happened? And so I think even a lot of the younger people in the industry now don't know. They don't know all that went down in the 90s. So I'm really happy to sit here with you and
even the 80s. I mean, heavens, look back to the 50s.
Well,
when they formed. I mean,
the whole thing.
I mean, it's always been a fight. There's never been an easy time.
Right.
Mostly, the first fisheries rules were about oysters in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And it's just been a continuous thing ever since.
It has.
But really, it was all about shellfish, not so much finfish at all.
Yeah.
But like right now, and this whole, recreational fishing thing is deceiving, because really, I mean, as far as I go, back in the day, before CCA and all this, everybody got along so well. And they still get along well. It's only this little radical element of CCA. There's no sensibleness in them. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. They may say that about me, which I will say that I can be very radical, but on the other hand, I'm certainly not as radical as some are. And I think everybody ought to be able to give their own opinion unencumbered too. But, when you get playing, these dirty tricks like the commission's doing, that's just not right.
Right.
No matter how the vote goes, there's not even any decent discussion. They just say, make a motion, second it from their supermajority. And that's one thing that Chuck Lockridge was right about. He said in the Marine Fisheries Commission meeting, right when he got on there, that, I was sitting in the audience, heard him say it. We've got a 5-4 majority, and we're going to do this thing. And now we're willing to give you a few things, but this is going to happen. See, that would never happen before him.
So
never.
Why did you say he was right?
Well, because he was right. Because he's got the 5-4 vote. Because you've got him, you've got that Mark guy, you've got that.
He was correct in saying that the recreational.
He's correct in saying that whatever he's discussing is going to pass.
I got you. Yeah.
And he wants to give you 1 or 2 bones, crumbs. And then they get in there pretending, like there's nothing being done. Well, we haven't looked at this in 2 years. Therefore, they think they're starting from the beginning. Like nothing rules ever been made when you got a rule book that thick.
Right.
Not that, right now the rule book is on 11 by 8.5 size by about an inch thick. I'm used to the rule books were 5 by 7s, and they were about an inch thick.
So, to wrap this up, because I know you got stuff to do.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to get it on record that you're very involved, and you were on the ground floor of the Carteret Catch branding program, and this whole local seafood movement. Do you think this local seafood movement will help shift public perception in favor of the, sort of the idea of fishermen as farmers and not as, the old stereotype of, tearing up the world, tearing up the sea? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think it already has. I think there's already been a tremendous impact, and I'll tell you why. The example I'll cite is the game fish bill. So Carteret Catch was the first of any of this, and it was, just a little bit of background on them. It was started from nothing and became something. And the reason it became something was because of the time it came to be. It was the right time for something like this. And so it wasn't just a fisherman thing. It had science, NOAA scientists, NIMS people. It had some commercial fishermen, but it had restaurant people. It had consumers. It had all the user groups that complete the whole seafood industry. Because the seafood industry is made up of a lot more than just commercial fishermen. And that's why, people who want to put on all these rules want you to think you're only hurting a small amount of people, So therefore, why not? Who cares about them type deal. But what happened at Game Fish was we pulled out these contacts that we have developed through Carteret Catch, through all the rest of the littler catch groups, and through NC Catch, which came in on the tail end of things. Contacts that were made from the catch groups are the people who swung the pendulum in game fish hearing. There's the best example I know to give you. You had restaurateurs, you had, of course, fishermen, you had recreational fishermen, you had dealers, you had small family dealers, like the Eddie and Allisons of the world. Mm-hmm. And those people testifying are what stopped game fish. So there you go.
So our legislators saw that this is not just about a handful of fishermen.
Correct. Which is what they've been told. Which is what the CCA whispers in their ear. Well, that's how we, that was our main goal, was to connect, of course, consumers to seafood.
Yeah.
And I think we've done that. As much as we've been able to so far, but we keep increasing our awareness campaigns. We're running a successful campaign right now in state that is, through a giveaway that we're doing with Time Warner Cable. So we're out there trying to. We have this thing to where we're giving away 2 motel rooms for a night, an excursion. The first excursion was at Mark Hooper's seafood place where they're going to catch their clams. They're going to take them to the bistro, and bistro's going to cook them and serve them to them with wine parents.
Wow.
And our second giveaway, which is almost concluded tomorrow, I think Friday is the end of that one. During that giveaway, we're having an excursion with Jess Hawkins, doing the eco tour clam thing again, wild clamming this time. And the restaurant is the Ice House Restaurant in Swansboro, which I personally consider to be part of Carteret County. Mm-hmm. Although the TDA apparently doesn't. That's another story. And 2 motel rooms again at Beaufort Inn. So,
how about the dinner for 2 on the trawler?
Yeah, Carteret Catch does a thing called the Fisherman's Village. And our seafood festival basically sucks, as you know.
The North Carolina Seafood
The North Carolina Seafood Festival.
Yeah.
They're getting better, but only under duress from the ag department. They were pretty darn good, and then those of us who managed things left, and then they got really, really sorry, and then there was a movement for good, but then it was rejected by the Seafood Festival. So after the second rejection, which we had tried to work with them the year before on a Friday night thing, which ultimately, right before we were having the event, they pushed us out. So we said, to hell with you, and have a very successful Fisherman's Village at Jack's in the middle of the Seafood Festival on private property.
It's a waterfront bar.
It is a waterfront bar, so you can get a drink at the same time you're being educated. The owners are awesome people, and this was an old fish house. Jack's was an old fish house. It was Oliver Davis's fish house and Lucky 7 fish house, well, Lucky 7 fleet. Anyway, it historically is a fish house. So we had, they let us tie up a 90-foot trawler, shrimp boat. We modified their deck and put a gangway so people can talk to the captain of the boat, the owner of the boat. They can see heads on shrimp that they're getting ready to eat. The headed shrimp, not the heads on shrimp. Yeah. But they show them heads on shrimp, what they look like. They were just caught by the crowd. And when you get off the boat, then you are served local shrimp with a dipping sauce that, we have a couple of dipping sauce. One, Kathy Fulcher does. Brent supplies, Brent B&J Seafood, supply the boat and the donations of the shrimp. Kathy makes a sauce. She's an excellent cook. We also have a sauce done by Tim at the Bistro that uses our sponsor product, which is shellback rum. So we have a rum sauce too. And we have the Wicked Tuna fishermen that come and talk to people, and they're a big hit. You know, my buddy Britt Shackelford, who needs to be interviewed for this whole thing, and Dewey Himmelwright. I'm assuming you're getting Dewey, of course. And Dewey's a young guy. He's new fishery. I mean, he's a fisheries warrior, man. Dewey is a warrior. So is Britt. So is Jamie Ribel up there. So is Tillman Gray. You know, I love Tillman Gray, as you know.
Tillman, yeah.
Tillman. And, you know, and Hardy and David Hilton. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there must be some down south. I don't know who they are or where they are. But I know the first meeting we had as a Southern Committee person, it was about shrimping on New River, and there were about 200 heads showed up to that meeting of shrimp fishermen. I was like, I didn't even think they had hardly anybody left down here. But they're coming out of the woodwork. Mm-hmm. I mean, you couldn't even find a parking place. There was so many. Yeah. So they're there, you know. Somebody needs just to wrestle that crowd together and do something with them.
That's right.